best as we may or find it possible so to do, let us pray together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. The trained mind, when brought face to face with the mystery of Jesus, has no choice but to seek to reduce it to some unit of comprehension and understanding. In other words, the mystery somehow has to make sense. This is a legitimate and inescapable demand, one profoundly significant and primary consideration must be held steadily in mind as this sort of examination is pursued. Despite all the merit that there is in the scholarly and reverential researches into the facts concerning the historical Jesus, they do not nor can they explain him adequately. A spiritual genius of any kind of genius, for that matter, cannot ever be explained in any complete sense. This is true whether the explanation is in terms of his historical setting or his psychological pattern, his social, biological, and religious heritage, or whatnot. The one thing about Jesus that no explanation can compass is why Jesus differs from those others whom the same explanation would fit. Uniqueness is continually elusive. Any explanation of Jesus in terms of the social and economic forces of his time must inevitably explain his contemporaries as well. Such may explain why he was a particular kind of Jew, for instance, but it does not explain why the other Jews were not Jesus. And that is, after all, the most important question, since the thing that is most compelling about him is not so much the way in which he resembled his fellows, but the way in which he differed from the rest of them. It is reasonable to suppose that Jesus inherited the same traits as countless other Jews of his time. He grew up in the same society, the same traditions, pinnacled on the same funded prophetic insights, yet he was Jesus, and the others were not Jesus. Often we seek refuge in history or psychology or economics, and we are reluctant to face the problems which remain when history or psychology or economics has done its uttermost. All these disciplines and others are useful in their way, but the tragedy is in forgetting what that way is. In other words, to quote a young sociologist who died long before high noon, the scientific mood does not imply that other moods are fatuous or futile. It does not hold that the truths it ennobles men to discover are the only truth. The scientist knows too well that behind the symbols of mathematics and the formulae of chemistry and physics and the rigid generalizations of psychology and the social sciences lie the unexplained mysteries of twilight and music, of autumn nights fringed with silver, of human fortitude and human idealism. We pick up our journey today Jesus and the Disinherited. Last Sunday we ended on a note with which I wish to begin today. It's rather awkward to try to do this in the context of sermon and inspiration. The temptation is to make it seem and sound like the unrealities of the classroom. Jesus was a Jew. A Jew. And as a Jew, he belonged to the Jewish community, using community in the formal and informal sense, that was surrounded by the Roman Gentile world primarily, certainly in terms of the kind of government that held the reins, that established the frontiers and the controls over the common life. This is true. The civilization by which he was surrounded was primarily Greek civilization, for the Romans were wonderful human beings who were able to develop far-reaching skills and techniques of government. They were remarkable engineers because upon the engineering skill depended the security of the empire, but they were not essentially civilized in the way the Greeks were civilized. This is no reflection on them. It's simply the fact of history. And the Greeks were civilized, and they had been conquered, and as one historian puts it, the conquered made conquest of the conqueror. The Greek, with his sensitive mind and his world view and the subtle nuances of his culture, simply moved all through the common Roman life and gave to the Roman mind a feeling tone and a quality of perception that was not indigenous to the mind itself. But be that as it may, the culture was a Greco-Roman culture in that sense. And this was the sea that surrounded this island of the Jewish community, and Jesus was one of these. Now, the pressure upon this island was very great because of the nature of the case. Even people who have no sense of destiny do not wish to be controlled. But if you have a sense of destiny, then to be controlled is something that takes on the nature of blasphemy. So the Romans, even though they had accepted this responsibility as an invitation of the Jews who were hard up for some release from the inner pressures upon which to which their lives were subjected. Nevertheless, there was the tension between the Roman world and the Jewish community, because always there was the sense of destiny, and that which blocked the sense of destiny was the political power and the economic power that was characteristic of the Roman Empire. So the climate was a very stormy climate. It was like the climate of Little Rock, the first day that the federal troops went in. That's the kind. Now this gives you some feeling quality of the kind of climate. This was the constant state of mind of the body politic, if I may use such words. I remember many years ago, I attended a conference in Indianapolis, and it was the conference of the World Student Volunteer Movement, a great missionary movement that at one time was the spearhead of evangelical Protestantism as it sought to conquer the world. We were young, and we did not like the rather stodgy kind of program that they had. They brought people back from the ends of the earth, and the people said nice things, but we thought that they needed to bite into life. Youth is always trying to bite into something. So we withdrew. 550 of us withdrew, not breaking up the conference, no, but we withdrew for a series of programs of our own. We felt that if we could select the people who would come and would have a little time of our own, we could get the truth rather than merely the facts. So we decided that we would have a meeting on the impression of a series of foreign students at the time, and their impression of American education. And since they were all among friends, we felt that they would tell us what this was really like. One of the young ladies who spoke was a Korean girl. She was a sophomore at Syracuse University. She made a statement something like this: I know that I have been asked to talk to you about my attitude towards American education as seen from the vantage point of a sophomore at Syracuse University. I'm a Korean, and there's only one thing that a Korean has any right to talk about in public, and that is freedom from Japan. And for 20 minutes, she made a passionate plea. And then at the end was this tremendous peroration. If you see a little American boy and you ask him what he wants, he says, I want a penny to buy some candy or to get a whistle or to put in my piggy bank. But if you see a little Korean boy and you ask him what he wants, he says, I want freedom from Japan. And the next person to speak was a graduate student from Harvard who was Japanese. And this was very interesting. Now the climate, this is all that I'm mentioning this for, not to tell you what happened. The climate of which this Korean girl spoke is the climate in which Jesus lived all of his life, and the climate in which he was crucified. Not very far from the place where he grew up a man decided that he could do something about Rome. So he organized the young men into a great insurrection. And the insurrection did not last, did not fulfill itself. These men were killed, were caught, were captured, and most of them were crucified. And the town nearest to the place where the insurrection, from which the insurrection sprang, was burned to the ground 2,000 years before Hitler. A town was destroyed because of what somebody or bodies in that town had done. And the town had to be rebuilt. And to rebuild it, it required carpenters. And Nazareth was only 5 or 6 miles away. It is not unreasonable to assume that among the carpenters who rebuilt Sepphoris was Joseph and Jesus. What was going on in his mind? A sensitive Jew, deeply gripped by the passion of destiny that belonged to Israel, feeling in the lonely watches of the night that the God of Israel kept a tryst with him. What did it say? What did he say to him? How can I fulfill the deep insistences of my heart and spirit and mind until I make some basic decision about the enemy, the survival of the people? This was his problem. Before he could get over to considerations which had to do with the meaning of existence, with the particular expression of his life, he had to deal with this crucial problem. Just as you would if you are a native South African this morning and you were trying to decide about a vocation, about the meaning of the voice of God in your heart, you would have to hear through the climate, given my situation, what do I do if I love God? Do I join up? With the Zealots? The Zealots were those, who felt that there's only one thing that the Roman understands, and that's seeing his own blood flow. That's a language that he can understand. And they were interesting people. They walked along, they had these long daggers up their sleeves. And they'd go along in pairs, talking, attending to their own business, and they'd see a very prosperous-looking Roman. And they'd walk up to him and greet him, and then accompany him a little, talking of commonplace nothings, and then before he knew it, his heart would be punctured. And as he stretched out dying, they would look over him weeping, wondering who had done this violent thing. What a terror. God will give his angels charge concerning you. He will bear you up, they will bear you up on their wings, lest you dash your foot against a stone. Do it. Destroy the enemy. God will take care of it, because this that the destiny be fulfilled. And when you do anything to remove that which blocks the destiny, you become an arm of the righteous will of God. And God will support you because your cause is righteous, because your cause is his cause. Why didn't Jesus become one of them? But more crucially, why did he select one of them as his disciple? I don't know the answer. But he remained a zealot. Because when you read the listing of the disciples even now, it is so-and-so and so-and-so, the zealot. He kept the title. So his point of view must have remained sufficiently intact to be identified. Then there were those who said, why be picayunish about this? Rome has everything anyway. It has all the power. It has all the economic resources. It is able to place one man here and he remains, or another man there. And if you play your hand right, you can manipulate this pagan empire from the inside, so that at the strategic moment when the destiny of Israel is ripe and Messiah comes, there will be at every critical, sensitive, crucial spot in the Roman Empire one of us penetrated, cover all the area. And then when 0 hour comes, the thing collapses and you have all the strategic spots. And after all, the culture is pretty good. It's pretty good. Nobody wants to be different. When you go to a place, you can't eat what you want to eat because of something in you that discriminates about diet. This is a nuisance. You can't marry whom you want to marry because of this insistence about destiny that's unique. This is a nuisance. So why not just become culturally a good Roman? And then everything that's coming to the Roman will come to you, including his fall. And he showed him all the kingdoms of the world and all the glory of them. And if you will bow down and worship me, if you will give to these kingdoms the nerve center of your consent, then all that they are will be yours. Yours. And after all, this is what you want. Or there were those who said the whole business is rotten. And I had better withdraw. We had better withdraw from it. We've heard a great deal about them now since the Dead Sea Scrolls have turned up. The Essenes, they said, don't contaminate yourself, really. Don't get mixed up in all of this. Withdraw. Find a place where there is a climate of your own. Something so wonderful about this, isn't it? Do you ever long to be on that island somewhere where there's no proing and conning, and you don't have to work out so many tiresome adjustments to people who are going in a direction that is not your direction. But if you could just get on this island with even a desert and a sea between you and all these others, then you could live your wonderful life of quiet disintegration. Now, the Essenes were more positive than this. They felt that they could devote all of their time to prayer and to having no responsibility for possessions, just that perhaps, and this is the wonderful thing, perhaps it is possible to create by sheer naked spiritual energy the kind of groundswell that moves at a level that's deeper than politics, deeper than cosmologies, deeper than dogmas of any kind, but to a groundswell of the Spirit of the living God that will shatter the foundations of empires without anybody's ever having to lift a finger of violence. And this is a reasonable thing. If God is the creator of life, and this is the end which God is seeking, why not be able to become a channel through which the living Spirit of the living God can be released at a point that will shake the foundation? So don't fight, pray. Don't haggle. Meditate. Purify. At least find one place. Let the Spirit of God find one place that is wide open through which the moving energy which is His can be released into the world to do its perfect work. Why didn't He go with them? Now, this is part 2 of part 1. Talked about the world, the climate. Now, what kind of religion did Jesus bring to his problem? Obviously, very little that is relevant can be said about this in 5 minutes. But I want to point out one very important thing and then touch it. The religion of Jesus insisted that a man is responsible for his actions before God. But more crucially, a man is responsible for his reactions to his environment before God. So that it became very important to Jesus what his reaction to this total situation was, because this was a part of the responsibility which he held before God. Now, what kind of God did he have? God was the creator of the world. God was righteous will. God was a person. Now, this is very important. A person. Now, interestingly enough, notions of God as personal in the history of the human race usually belong to what we call the primitive cultures. Let me illustrate how we reproduce this. When I was in seminary, one of my classmates came from a little farm, and he was a very pious, very devout fellow, and God was just almost glorified man moving around. And then after he began to study, he's studying psychology and social origins and all the history of ideas, and well, he became more and more sophisticated. And I went with him one Sunday to his little congregation at Leroy, New York. And I was interested in listening to his prayer. Now, this boy for whom, when he was much less involved and less complicated, God was very real. God was a person. He began his prayer, "O thou metaphysical absolute." Now, he'd come all the way. Now, this is the thing that happens. You see, as you are simple and primitive, God is real. God is personal. God is primary. But as you begin to deal with notions of generalizations, with concepts that are binding in order that the total structure of human life and existence will have some general principles upon which on the basis of which it moves, then the personal God is lost in the logic of the generalization. Now, this is the thing that happened. The Greeks, when they were primitive, when they were much less complicated, they had many gods, and every god was personal, and he had a series of personal acts. Some acts were good, some acts were bad, but he had a thisness and a thatness about him. But as they began to get general ideas and the idea of one universal spirit, this universal spirit sort of absorbed all these personal gods. Now, this is the thing about the God of Israel that to me is just absolutely staggering to my mind, and that is that here in Jesus and in Israel, God was personal, God was righteous will, and at the same time, without any loss of personality or persona, he was the creator of existence. They put these two notions, these two primary demands that the human spirit makes about the nature of existence, if it is to live its life with some measure of meaning and dignity, they put these together in one creative synthesis and said that this God who is righteous will expresses his righteous will in time. And if he expresses his righteous will in time, then that means that in time we see the operation of purposes and goals as over against a time process that is continuous, that has no beginning and no ending. It's rather extraordinary, isn't it, how as we have become more sophisticated in our own time, and how God, any sense of a personal God, is more and more lost among the brackets of higher mathematics. That what we think about our destiny as human beings becomes increasingly pessimistic. This is interesting. Now, I don't quite know how to resolve this. I know how I have resolved this. But the problem is the same. What Jesus brought then as a part of his increment, and I stop and begin at this point next week. What Jesus brought as central in his thought, this is what he brought to the problem. This was the kind of raw material that the problem had to work with, that God had to work with in him. An idea of God as righteous will and creator of existence. a righteous will that expressed itself in time, in terms of purposes and goals and destinies. And in order to do that, it had to be particularized in a group of people, so you get the community that has some primary relationship with God. And the goal of this community at first was to guarantee itself, and through the open-end, transcendent wonder and glory of the prophetic spirit, this destiny that at one time was confined to the people of the beloved covenant and the beloved community who were responsive to the particular acts of God in human history, these people became the living instruments through which this experience of God would become a part of the experience and the destiny of the whole human race. And how to embrace this great idea and be yourself at the same time is the persistent dilemma. Walk with us as we wrestle to find a way to reveal thy life and thy spirit and thy mind, O God, 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 that we may be true to the light. Dismiss us with thy spirit and grant unto us thy peace, our Father.